Did you know that Almay is actually a combination of the two founders' names, Alfred and Fannie Mae? Welcome back to the Cosmetic Chronicles, the podcast where history meets beauty and tells the amazing stories behind some of the world's most notorious brands. I'm your host, Sarah Carvalho, and I'm a beauty journalist who has been obsessed with makeup since my first swipe of mascara. In this episode, we're covering Almay, the first ever hypoallergenic brand, originally founded for sensitive skin people, and also the brand that has begun a new resurgence thanks to a 2026 rebrand. So, as always, I'll start with little Sarah's story. I always remember Almay being at the drugstore, but the first product I really remember purchasing from them was one of their eye enhancing color palettes. So we will get into this later in this episode. It was a very large campaign for them, a very successful campaign, and I was one of those success stories. I was a consumer, definitely. And these were eyeshadow palettes that basically use color theory, and you would get to pick a palette, an eyeshadow palette based on your eye color. So they had the brown eye palette, the blue eye palette, so on and so forth. And I just loved this idea. It was like brand new to me. I wasn't an artist, so color theory just like wasn't something that I lived in every day. And so I was just so excited to have something that felt like it was meant for me specifically. And apparently a lot of other people did too, because this was a very successful line for them, still is. And I love that they kind of thought of this before it became super mainstream. I think now everyone's, getting color matching and all that stuff. This was early 2000s. So they were ahead of their time. And I just remember that being a very exciting purchase for me. I also want to give a shout out to the brand. They sent me some of their iconic products, some of their newer products, which I'll talk about later in the episode. And I am going to be playing with those products over on my Instagram. More specifically, I'll be trying to is the important phrase here. I'll be trying to recreate a supermodels look from the Met Gala over on my Instagram. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much to the brand for letting me play with some of these products. And of course, as always, we're going to go over all the products later on in the episode. But for now, let's go back to the beginning. In 1930, a chemist and pharmacist in New York City named Alfred Wodowitz was looking to compound some cosmetics for his wife, Fannie Mae. Now, Fannie Mae dealt with cosmetic allergies, which is really not surprising considering what people were putting in makeup products at the time. I mean, up until the 1950s, radium was a fairly standard cosmetics ingredient. So that's terrifying. And it makes sense that she was looking for cosmetic products that did not irritate her sensitive skin. So Alfred started researching for two things. One, finding out which of the ingredients in her current cosmetic products were causing the irritation, and then finding ingredients that were pure and gentler but could still deliver quality. And smartly, he decided to enlist the help of dermatologists and experts in contact dermatitis at the time. So he specifically reached out to one dermatologist named Dr. Marion Sulzberger to help get suggestions for ingredients to avoid. Dr. Sulzberger was the expert in contact dermatitis at the time. And so this led to Alfred creating a hypoallergenic and fragrance-free makeup line, the first ever. And this new brand that was originally called Al plus May, later became Almay, was born in 1931. From what I can tell, the early products included the hypoallergenic foundation and powder. And interestingly, Almay actually started off as being available by prescription only. They weren't trying to sell at a counter in Macy's. They weren't going door to door. It was a prescription only product. Another bold move for them is they also fully disclosed all of the individual ingredients in its products well before this actually became mandatory decades later. They also provided patch tests and other materials to physicians to help diagnose contact allergens. So then that way they could really determine if this makeup product would work for a person's specific skin. They also created custom formulations to individuals proven to be allergic to a specific ingredient through their physicians. So, as you can imagine, dermatologists and doctors around New York City began recommending these Almay formulations, and the brand very quickly grew out of the prescription only phase. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't find a ton of information around this time from when it became available to everyone over the counter, where it was sold specifically. They obviously eventually ended up in a drugstore, but the transition from prescription only to drugstore is kind of vague. And I don't even have a full idea of what the first products were apart from a hypoallergenic foundation. I'm assuming the journalists at the time were focused on, like the depression and war and things, but it does make for a pretty thin history section here on this episode. But the research I could find just suggested that the transition to mainstream retail was pretty gradual, probably spanning the late 1930s through the 1950s. Also, it's important to remember the broader cosmetics industry context. So by 1930, only a small handful of companies controlled 40% of the cosmetics industry, and they released thousands of factory produced products under various names. So Almay was a deliberate outlier to that model in the early years because everything was being so like custom made. And it would kind of make sense, I guess, that because everything was not being factory produced and mass produced, everything was still made in very small, customizable quantities. It's going to be hard to find a lot of information on those brands because they weren't being advertised or splashed across counters or anything like that. However, thanks to old friend of the pod, cosmeticsandskin.com, if you are an early listener to this podcast, they were pretty much the ones who did all of the research for me for the first few episodes. Definitely check out cosmeticsandskin.com if you are a history nerd. Like they have images, they have ads, they have so much information. It's a great source. But through that website, I found that Almay was actually acquired by Schieffelin and Company in 1949. Now, Schieffelin and Company was a leading importer and wholesaler of drugs and cosmetics at the time, and it was also one of the oldest continuously operating companies in the United States, with roots going as far back as 1781. And so I imagine that once they came in 1949 and acquired Almay, they provided that distribution and expansion since they already had the wholesale infrastructure to push products into drugstores more nationally outside of just New York City. As mass market cosmetics in general expanded across American pharmacies and department stores, Almay quickly established itself as a trusted drugstore beauty brand. So the brand leaned heavily into safe beauty. If you listen to my Maybelline episode, that was also a huge part of their advertising as well because of the horrible lash and brow conundrum of the early 1930s. So Almay leaned heavily into that safe beauty, everyday wearability, minimal irritation claims, and products that were designed for specific skin types. So later on, they ended up providing products that were for oily skin, for dry skin, being very not only hypoallergenic and fragrance free, but also being able to target to different skin types. And they also began to lean heavily into eye sensitivity safety, creating their infamous eye makeup remover pads, which I have here, which I'll be using later on Instagram, and also just gentle eye products in general, eyeliners, mascaras, things like that. And noting that all of them were ophthalmologist tested and using that messaging much earlier than a lot of their competitors. This really helped Almay dominate a niche that eventually became more of what we hear now. So we hear a lot of this mascara is safe for people with sensitive eyes, and later on, if you're a contact lens wearer. But Almay was really one of the first to focus on this, again, this specific niche that was sensitive for safe eyes, as well as being fragrance free, hypoallergenic, all that good stuff. So this era, this kind of leading into the 1950s, helped position Almay as a practical alternative to more of their fashion-driven makeup brand competitors. However, it didn't necessarily mean that Almay didn't have on-brand releases. So in the 1960s, I found certain products, great advertising, by the way. I'll be putting that over on my Instagram as well. But they had items like the High Frost nail polish, Body Silk fragrance lotion. I also found ads for Color Moist lipstick, powder to cream pastel eyeshadows, and a double blush, which was a glowy blush and highlighter duo, all of which use the tagline, "So pure, it's hypoallergenic." And according to trademark information that I found from 1970, it appeared that Almay had at least a trademark in the following product areas: lipsticks, mascaras, eyeshadows, brow pencils, brow powders, cosmetic eyeliner, makeup remover, blushers, powders, hand and body creams, bath oils, setting preparations, cream rinses, nail enamels, polishes, remover, perfumes, and colognes. So up until the 1980s, Almay's distribution strategy was wide availability. So drugstores, mass retail with a low barrier to entry, so affordable cost, accessibility, plus medicalized trust positioning rather than being a trend-setting fashion authority. So they leaned really heavily into being tested and trusted by ophthalmologists, dermatologists, physicians. But leading into the 1980s, Almay's ownership began to see some multiple shifts, let's say, as it moved into becoming a more wider known, more successful brand. So the first major shift that I found happened in 1983. This is when International Playtex acquired Almay. So in 1982, a year before International Playtex acquired them, Almay had actually been $5 million in the red on sales of $19 million. So when Playtex came in, they had actually been expanding beyond feminine hygiene production and into broader personal care and consumer lifestyle categories. So they chose Almay because it fit into that expansion because it already had a very defined position within the market. So they were hypoallergenic, sensitive skincare cosmetics, and they were sold through drugstores. And it had strong trust and repeat customer loyalty, which made it very attractive to the mass retail space. And so for Playtex, the acquisition was less about turning Almay into something new and more about absorbing a brand that already worked within a very specific staple niche. However, the acquisition was helpful to Almay as well because they had been, like I said, 5 million in the red. So after 1 year under Playtex's control, Almay made $3 million on the sales of $33 million. And from there, the mid 1980s saw a period of restructuring and asset reshuffling across Playtex. I believe I get into it in the Revlon episode, but there was a lot of like Playtex was part of like a food brand, and then the food brand got sold and chopped up, and I think Neutrogena is somewhere in there. Like there was a lot going on in the mid 80s in the Playtex world. Like a lot of conglomerates at the time, there was a pressure to streamline their portfolios and focus on core business areas, which meant that non-core divisions like cosmetics were increasingly evaluated through more of a financial lens than just like a brand building one. They didn't really want to work on building the brand. They just wanted it to be financially successful without having to wait too long. So in that kind of environment, Almay became less of a strategic growth pillar for them and more of an asset that could be repositioned or sold depending on the direction the corporation wanted to go in. So basically, long story short, that led to the next shift in 1987 when Almay was acquired by Revlon. This has very different strategic context. So Revlon was actively consolidating within beauty rather than expanding outward from it. So kind of opposite to what Playtex was doing, where they wanted to grow outside of feminine hygiene and into beauty and cosmetics. Revlon already had a very successful drugstore makeup brand, but their goal was scale, not necessarily diversification. So the brands like Revlon and Almay would be sitting next to each other at the drugstore. So, and they still do. So it's not really like they were trying to diversify, but in terms of going outside of cosmetics, but they were distinctly different, even within the same space. They had something like an Almay, which is a dermatologist-oriented cosmetics brand, with Revlon that was a little bit more fashion-led beauty brand. And it helped really round out the Revlon Inc., their presence in the mass market beauty space. And what you end up seeing across these transitions is less of a story of Almay being transformed during this time and more of a story of it being resituated. First, inside a diversified consumer goods portfolio, and then inside a company like Revlon that was actively building a more focused beauty portfolio. So by the end of the 1980s, Almay was positioned almost like Revlon's clinical counterpart in drugstores. And because of this, they really started leaning even more into their functional beauty category rather than just having foundations and powders. So keep in mind, if you weren't around in the 90s, my youngins, the 90s drugstore competition was getting more crowded. So we were getting Maybelline, we were getting L'Oreal, CoverGirl, Neutrogena. There's more that I'm blanking on. But again, Almay differentiated from a lot of them, probably closest to CoverGirl, I'd say, but still, they were the first that was safe, gentle, non-irritating, hypoallergenics. But they started adding a few other pillars within their safe skin offerings. So they had oil-free complexion products that became a really big core message for them. They increased focus on sensitive eyes, more specifically focusing on contact lens wearers because that was becoming more popular. And again, really leaning on dermatologist tested formulations across all categories. And also product shifts into wider ranges of complexion products as well. So in 1991 specifically, Almay introduced a subline often referred to, at least in my research, as the darker tones of Almay, which was an expansion of its complexion range into deeper shades. So I actually read a piece in Fashionista specifically about this, about how this move aligned with a broader shift across beauty in the early 90s, where brands just started to respond a little bit more to their lack of inclusivity, though very slowly and unevenly. And they were trying to make their advertising more inclusive. They're starting to make their shade ranges more inclusive. But obviously, product development still lagged behind actual demand. So this was one of those moves that Almay did. And then in 1992, 1 year later, they actually tapped black model Beverly Peel, who had walked for Versace and covered magazines like Mademoiselle and Glamour, to star in its now legendary advert to introduce its new range of shades for sensitive skin. So in this photo, she has this beautifully smooth complexion with a few small shade matching products, including a compact and a tube of liquid foundation. And this began also their use of famous people in their advertising. So Elaine Irwin is one of the early ones. Then came Mila Djokovic, who had a classic 90s Almay commercial featuring her promoting how fresh the products would make you. And Karen Duffy, the MTV VJ known as Duff, also became face of Almay in the mid 90s. And she also apparently was the Revlon Charlie girl, which I don't think I knew that. And her tenure overlapped with Courtney Thorne Smith of Ally McBeal fame. So more and more people began to front or be the face of Almay, and that also brought them to another level in the drugstore space. Some other notable spokespeople during the 1990s and into the 2000s included Leslie Bibb, Lisa Butler, Jennifer Finnegan, Kathy Lee Gifford, Eva Hertzogova, Lauren Hutton, Mary Eve Nadeau, Stephanie Seymour, Fabiana Tambosi, and then Carrie Underwood in the early 2000s. So speaking of the early 2000s, let's talk about that significant product era in Almay's post-Revlon acquisition history, and of course where my Sarah story comes into play. In January of 2005, Almay launched the Intense Eye Color Collection. This is their first complete collection of color cosmetics, specifically designed to intensify the natural color of eyes. Here's a quote from Kevin Kells, who was the vice president of marketing for Almay at the time. Quote, "There's a reason why a bronze summer tan makes blue eyes sparkle, or a plum-colored sweater enhances brown eyes. The theory underneath it is called color theory, a precise combination of contrasting colors, those that sit opposite from each other on the color wheel, and complementary hues that will intensify eye color." End quote. Kells said in the past, women would have to ask a department store beauty advisor for a tutorial on the concept. But what they wanted to do was actually bring that prestige thinking into the mass retail space. So Another thing I didn't mention is these eyeshadow palettes also had numbers. So you knew like what to put on first, what went second, what went third, what was the liner, what was the shadow, what was the outside. It had you do the step-by-step smoky eye. And that was a big deal because, like he said, you used to have to go and have someone show you how to do that. Now you can go to your drugstore, pick up your brown eye palette, and it gave you the instructions right there on the package. And so one of the driving forces behind this collection, aside from adding a little drama to the eyes, was to make mass market cosmetics easier to shop. And Kell said, quote, "We know there are things we can do to make the shopping experience easier," end quote. So that was a huge success for them. It still is a product that is available. I wish I had my original. I remember it, but I wish I still had it. So that was a big deal for them, 2005. And then in 2008, they launched their Pure Blends line, which was their biggest color cosmetics initiative in 2 years. So pretty much from their Intense Eye Color collection, this was their next huge launch. This was an eco-friendly collection positioned to capitalize on the growing natural beauty trend. And yes, this is 2008, not 2018. Trends are just a cycle, y'all. The hypoallergenic formulas were made from 95.8% to 98.2% natural ingredients, including an exclusive complex of fruit and flower extracts. The products were also free of talc and added parabens. In addition, the packaging was made from 44% recycled materials on average. I will say that's impressive for 2008. Now brands are just starting to get there. And I got to give Almay credit here. They were already doing that recycled material packaging. And the assortment of the Pure Blends line included foundation, loose finishing powder, pressed blush, eyeshadow, and lip gloss, and retailed from $7 to about $14. Then in 2010, they signed what I think is probably one of their biggest names. They signed Kate Hudson as their global brand ambassador. This was definitely a deliberate repositioning move under Revlon to really refresh Almay's image and make it feel a little bit more contemporary in what by 2010 had become a very crowded drugstore market. So she was brought in to shift the feeling of the brand, I would say, rather than like showcase their formulation philosophy. She embodied and she still does, a very specific aesthetic, right? Minimal, natural makeup, effortless California beauty, wellness adjacent lifestyle branding. So that was kind of before the goops and the things in the world, the wellness trends were really starting at this point, and she kind of had that naturally. So her look was always soft, wearable color. She never really went like high impact glam. And so the partnership really made sense. Here are products that she promoted: the successful Intense Eye Color palette, like I just mentioned, their Smart Shade complexion line, and their Wake Up collection, which included a refresh of that blush and highlighter duo. And then in December 2012, Hudson, as the global brand ambassador, launched the Intense Eye Color Bold Nudes and their Smart Shade Mousse makeup in New York City. So she helped promote new launches as well as their hero products. So it was like injecting relevance into a brand that wasn't trying to do something that wasn't like them. So if you listen, sorry, I'm like plugging all of my other episodes, but they all kind of start to work with each other though. If you remember the CoverGirl episode, I talked about how they had tried to do this rebrand and it really shifted too far away from what people knew them for. And that was something that I think a lot of brands were struggling with at this time, because you have access to prestige brands through Sephora. You also have indie brands having access through social media, YouTube, e-commerce. You're having Target coming out and having brands like e.l.f. and Milani, more affordable but high quality. There's just so many more competitors in the space that you feel like you need to do something drastic to keep up. And it feels like with Almay, I can't see a time in the research where they really tried to do something that wasn't Almay. Like they always were like, we are for sensitive skin, we're hypoallergenic. They weren't trying to do anything wildly out of character. And I think that it matters. And so I think for them, they really leaned on that natural beauty made easy narrative, but used the celebrity association as they moved into more social media digital space to keep the brand present in a beauty landscape that was becoming a lot more fragmented and experience driven. So I gotta just a moment for Almay to just give them some credit, because they could have easily been swallowed up in the changes that kind of came in the mid 2010s, and they were riding through. And so now we're in the mid 2010s, and despite the brand's earlier campaign focusing on their deeper shade range and their complexion expansion, that expansion hadn't really translated into a long-term sustained inclusivity strategy. So over the decades from the 90s to the mid 2010s, their complexion offerings remained relatively narrow compared to the competitors, and their marketing increasingly drifted towards lighter skin consumers based on, who their ambassadors were, but also their actual shades of complexions and concealer products and things like that. And the brand's advertising history also became progressively less representative over time, even though other beauty brands had begun coming out and widening their shade range and casting more diverse campaigns. And I think the contrast really becomes more visible in what I guess the beauty world now just calls the post Fenty era. So once Rihanna's 2017 launch just reset expectations, legacy drugstore brands like Almay and CoverGirl were reassessed through a little bit more of a critical lens. And industry coverage that I found from this time really highlighted how quickly consumer expectations shifted, with inclusivity becoming a baseline requirement rather than a marketing angle, which it absolutely should be. And so by 2017, 2019, Almay was really responding to this. They began a visible repositioning effort under Revlon, including updated their campaigns and also their spokespeople choices. So they decided to partner with Rashida Jones, for example, as well as starting to create incremental shade range adjustments. So I found a quote from marketing director Antoinette Bavona, who had been with Revlon and Almay for about 26 years at that point and also worked on product development. Here's what she had to say. Quote, during research for our new brand positioning, we received feedback directly from consumers that they had felt excluded from the brand and that our product range did not meet their beauty needs. This was never our intention. Our brand belief and product offerings should reflect the brand's desire to be more inclusive. Somewhere along the way, Almay lost its way, targeting a small range of skin tones. We needed to reach a more diverse audience, end quote. And listen, I got to give them credit for just coming out and saying it, being like, we lost our way, because they were doing it in the early 90s, but I got to give them credit for acknowledging it and working on being better. So in 2019, Almay actually did another rebrand or repositioning of sorts, following an earlier image refresh that had attempted to modernize the brand for a more millennial-focused consumer, the Glossier of it all. And according to Global Cosmetics News, this wasn't a full rebrand from scratch in 2019, but it was rather a continuation and escalation of a recent overhaul. So effectively a second rebrand within a short period of time. So this new design was kickstarted with their biodegradable cleansing towelettes, with the eco-friendly products said to be showcasing Almay's brand message. Meanwhile, they had a recently launched skin perfecting comfort matte foundation. And so part of this rebrand was that it was now packaged in a recyclable glass container while also having a cap made of post-consumer recycled plastic. The Almay website was also redesigned, with the landing page citing its new clean and sustainable positioning. I found a quote from Kara Langen, who was the Senior Vice President of Global Marketing for Almay and also Mitchum and Cutex. Quote, it's the introduction of where we are evolving the Almay brand. It started from a place of do no harm on skin, but there's a much broader opportunity within the marketplace to do no harm on skin and the planet. We are expanding what it means to be hypoallergenic. We want to make sure we're focused on not irritating sensitive skin, but expanding that definition to be clean beauty. What we're doing with the brand places it in a fantastic position for growth in the coming years. So, after the 2019 rebrand phase, there wasn't, from what I could see, another immediate defining product moment or release or cultural breakthrough. Instead, I'd say from like 2020 to 2026, the brand kind of stayed anchored in its core identity while just trying to keep pace in this rapidly changing beauty market that was moving faster towards like indie innovation and skincare led positioning, which actually I think did them some good. But it was definitely more of like a holding pattern, I'd say, and a slow recalibration, not doing anything again too out of character. And then the next turning point in this period, I'd say, wasn't product led or company led or anything. It was actually corporate. So in 2022, Revlon filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which had ripple effects across its entire portfolio, as we can imagine. For Almay, that just translated into a quieter period, fewer bold launches, more incremental updates, and a noticeable focus on just trying to maintain shelf presence rather than expanding aggressively. In this time as well, many beauty brands were investing heavily in like the influencer ecosystem. Almay's activity felt comparatively restrained, and I think that was shaped as much by financial restructuring and figuring out what was going on with Revlon and also just the brand strategy. In 2023, Revlon emerged from bankruptcy as a private company owned by a consortium of its former lenders. And in that post bankruptcy time, Revlon began stabilizing and reorganizing its business. And so between 2023 and 2025, Almay leaned more deliberately into what it had always claimed to be, right? Clean, gentle, skin friendly makeup, but with more explicit alignment with the language of clean beauty. They really wanted to lean into that because that has been the thing in the last, I'd say, 8 years or so, is clean beauty. So you saw packaging updates, you saw messaging refreshes come through. But again, there wasn't a specific defining product or line that I found during this time. It was just tightening that narrative that they always had. And then in 2024, Michelle Peluso became Revlon's CEO. And her arrival really marked the beginning of that turnaround effect, that post bankruptcy effect, that included a narrower focus on its brands, beginning specifically with Revlon and Almay. In an interview with Glossy, Michelle said the team was currently revamping Almay with new formulas and packaging made for the clean, no makeup shopper. She also told Glossy that the upcoming changes had already earned the brand more shelf space in some mass retailers, so it was already working in their favor. And she stated that she believed that Almay had the right to win in clean drugstore makeup. Again, not drugstore makeup, clean drugstore makeup, which she said, quote, "We've seen amazing clean makeup take off in prestige and masstige, but we haven't seen it in mass," end quote. And then just last month, what is that, April 2026, you start to see these changes come through for Almay. They announced a refresh update to their decades-long commitment to gentle, skin-friendly makeup with a new global ambassador and campaign. The campaign is clean makeup that thinks it's skincare, and their new ambassador is the Miranda Kerr. Here's a quote I found from Miranda about this partnership. Quote, "I'm very intentional about the brands I partner with. What resonated with me about Almay is its commitment to clean beauty, alongside its long-standing focus on gentle, breathable formulas. It's a brand people have trusted for many years, and I love that it's clean and dermatologist tested." End quote. And the choice, again, just like Kate Hudson, the choice of Miranda Kerr is strategically great. That's a very professional way to put that. She's a certified health coach. I don't know if you know that. Certified health coach and a pioneer of clean beauty. She founded her own skincare brand, and she brings holistic wellness credibility that aligns very closely with Almay's already long-standing sensitive skin philosophy. And the partnership also helps push Almay closer to the clean beauty conversation without requiring a full formula redo, right? They're already doing the things. Instead, the brand's biggest changes have been visual. So they began last month rolling out more elevated packaging that they said is designed to feel less pharmacy and more beauty shelf. And their cult favorite clear complexion foundation and concealer, like this one, moved into new bottles, but the formula stayed exactly the same. Their Length and Lift mascara now comes in a monochrome tube made from partly recycled materials. Oh, and I didn't plan this, but I have all the ones I'm talking about right here. And their oil-free micellar eye makeup remover pads are in these updated tubs and are made from 100% plant-based fibers. And this reset also is arriving at a time where heritage drugstore brands in particular, and I'm talking about the Revlon, the Maybelline, the CoverGirl, the Almay, they're under increasing pressure to keep pace with the skincare makeup hybrids and then the newer clean beauty entrance, right? So rather than chasing trends head on, Revlon appears to be recontextualizing Almay's long-standing strengths. So Almay's already been doing clean beauty. They've been doing clean beauty since the 1930s, right? But now we're trying to make them more contemporary with, again, the packaging feeling maybe a little bit more luxurious, a little bit more streamlined, having them look nice next to each other. And I think it'll be really fun to see what they come out with now that they're kind of entering this new era. And with someone like Miranda Kerr as their face, I imagine it will be just an exciting phase for them to just lean into what they've already been doing this whole time and see if they can introduce their brand to younger audiences now, especially with a face like Miranda Kerr, who's so famous and so beautiful and has a lot of health, wellness credibility around her. I'll be curious to see how this rebrand does and how, what does TikTok do with Almay? I'll be curious to see. And I'll end with a quote from Erica Woods, who's the Senior VP of Mass Marketing at Revlon. Quote, Almay has always stood for gentle, skin-friendly makeup, but we saw an opportunity to modernize how that story shows up. End quote. All right, we've made it to the rabbit hole of the week, and this week's rabbit hole is going to be all about the incredible dermatologist, Dr. Marion Sulzberger. So for anyone who's new listening to this, my rabbit hole of the week is a rabbit hole that I have fallen down during my research process for the episode. And this one was a pretty quick rabbit hole. It was just, I was lucky that I landed on a webpage that kind of had all the information in one place. But I really wanted to learn more about this dermatologist because at the beginning of Almay's story, their product development was shaped specifically in collaboration with a dermatologist's expertise, including Dr. Sulzberger. And while he wasn't necessarily the founder, his involvement really helped guide those early decisions around ingredient safety, skin irritation, knowing what ingredients could cause irritation. He was an expert at contact dermatitis at the time. And so he helped embed a clinical approach to the brand's overall formulation philosophy, which is still their philosophy to this day. And I wanted to know, who was this renowned dermatologist? Well, thank you to the special collection section of the UC San Francisco Library, because here's a brief bio. And I want to read this because what a life, okay? What a life. Let's go. So Marion B. Sulzberger was born in New York City in March of 1895. His father, who had emigrated from Germany in the 1860s, was a meat packer, and he attended Sachs Collegiate Institute, the Franklin School, and the Pennsylvania Military College. After attending Harvard University for 1 year, he left school and then spent the next 12 months working his way around the world as a laborer, a stoker, a sailor, and a camel driver. Okay. On his return to New York City in 1914, he worked for 2 years in his father's business. But then with the outbreak of the war in Europe, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1916 and received aviation ground school training at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, eventually becoming a pilot and instructor in Pensacola, Florida. Following the end of the war, Dr. Sulzberger went to Europe and enrolled in the medical school of the University of Geneva. I almost said Genova. University of Geneva. Prior to receiving his MD from the University of Zurich in 1926, he had received the equivalent of a baccalaureate in medical science from the School of Medicine of the Sorbonne, Paris, in 1922. He interned at the Canton Hospital in Zurich and served as assistant in dermatology and syphilology at the University Dermatological Clinic in Zurich. And returning to New York City again in 1929, he entered a private practice with Fred Wise, MD, which was an association that lasted until 1935. Also during that time, from 1931 to 1946, he was associate attending dermatologist at Montefiore Hospital, and in 1934 became associate attending physician in charge of dermatology at the French hospital. The year after that, he became assistant attending dermatologist at the New York Postgraduate Hospital and the hospital's Skin and Cancer Unit dispensary. In 1955, he was appointed George Miller Mackey Professor of Dermatology and Syphilology at New York University Bellevue Medical Center. Also, if you're wondering what syphilology is, it is the branch of medicine focused on the study and treatment of syphilis. So that's kind of what I thought, but I wanted to be sure. All right, a few more little bits about him. In 1961, he founded the Institute of Dermatologic Communication and Education and was appointed Technical Director of Research, Medical Research, and Development Command at the Office of the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army, a position he held until 1964, when he accepted a similar responsibility at the Letterman Army Institute of Research in San Francisco. And during World War II, he directed research on tropical skin diseases, chemical warfare agents, and insect repellents and antifungal agents there and on Guam. So Dr. Sulzberger was a member of many medical and scientific societies and held significant offices in several of those. He was also a prolific author, over 100 classified reports to the U.S. Navy in World War II, 7 textbooks and many chapters in other books, and over 430 scientific papers. He was also an editor or co-editor of many journals. He was a lecturer and recipient of numerous awards. He made significant contributions to his chosen profession throughout his lifetime and trained many dermatologists practicing today in this country and abroad. So just a brief moment to say thank you to Dr. Sulzberger for all of his contributions to the world of dermatology, and in a small way also helping us sensitive skin folks get to still wear color cosmetics. Oh my God, syphilology. All right, iconic products. Let's talk about them. So, Almay, first up, hypoallergenic face powder, one of the brand's earliest complexion staples marketed around sensitive skin and minimal irritation. This helped establish Almay's medical adjacent identity in drugstores. Also, one of their early products, the Almay Eye Makeup Remover, a foundational category for the brand and one of its longest running hero products. We have it right here, especially among contact lens wearers and sensitive eye consumers. Another big product for them was their anti-wrinkle daily moisture lotion with sunscreen. This was a very early skincare meets makeup adjacent product that reflected Almay's shift toward dermatologist-driven daily skin maintenance. Then came their Clear Complexion line. This is a salicylic acid foundation that became one of the brand's most recognizable treatment makeup franchises. Then they had their Moisture Renew pressed powder. This was a dry skin focused complexion product that reflected that 1990s era of softer skincare inspired makeup. Of course, their intense eye color eyeshadow palettes, one of Almay's most recognizable launches ever. Their coordinated eyeshadow palettes designed around specific eye colors. Also, I didn't mention this either, but they had their eye color volumizing mascara. So this was also a cult favorite for sensitive eye folks. But also they were colored mascara like Black Emerald and Black Plum. I had the plum for sure. The Smart Shade Smart Balance makeup line. This was one of the brand's defining complexion systems, and this was marketed around adaptive shade technology and also simplified foundation matching. So they wanted to make it easier to find your shade without overcomplicating the whole process. So that was their Smart Shade line. The One Coat Get Up and Grow mascara. This was a major mascara franchise during the late 2000s, early 2010s that leaned into lash care messaging, as well as having growth focused claims. An extension of their Smart Shade franchise included their Smart Shade CC cream and their Smart Shade mousse makeup. And that was during that rise, the BB cream, the CC cream craze of the mid 2010s. And they also had their Pure Blends collection, which I talked about, which was that early move towards more mineral-inspired, cleaner beauty positioning before clean beauty became extremely mainstream. Now, this one was interesting. Their liquid eyeliner. So this was specifically like a pot eyeliner, but had a long white cap. This was a long-running drugstore favorite, and it has an exceptionally loyal consumer base that still searches for discontinued versions online. I found this on Reddit. There's a whole Reddit thread from, I think, just 2 years ago where people were like, oh, I bought my last 10 on eBay and I can't find it again. And they seem to have it still available, but I think the formula may have changed. But no, people are on Reddit trying to find the original liquid eyeliner. I wish I had tried it because I want to know. I want to know. But that is still a huge cult favorite. And it seems to be some like underground network of people trying to find them. And then more recently, their Ageless Smart Shade Foundation. So this was a skincare infused evolution of that Smart Shade range, this time featuring ingredients like hyaluronic acid and niacinamide, of course. And then their Gleam Big Lip Serum, which I've actually been wearing this entire time. So if you've liked my lips, it's Big Gleam. This is in the shade Lavender Dreams, number 200. And this is a glossy skincare inspired lip hybrid powered by plant-based squalene. And it's been positioned as providing hydration, fullness, and comfortable shine rather than any sticky texture. And I can co-sign because I've been talking for an hour and a half and my lips have not felt dry or sticky once. And like I said, this is one of their newer launches, and this is reflective of their broader shift towards clean makeup that thinks it's skincare positioning. And I also want to note that over on my Instagram, I have all of the products that Miranda Kerr used for her Met Gala look. And so she used a full face of Almay. Most of the products the brand had sent to me, and I just bought some of the last remaining ones, and I'll be trying again to recreate Miranda Kerr's Met Gala look using a full face of Almay. So keep an eye over on my Instagram because I will be showing that look over there. Let's end with some fun facts. So 70% of Almay's products are actually vegan, with a plan to transition to 100% of their portfolio being vegan by 2030. And lastly, I saw this a lot in a lot of articles, so I wanted to kind of end with this fun fact specifically. So the brand is extremely selective about what they put in their products, which of course makes a lot of sense, but I don't think people realize how selective they are. So they formulate with high quality skin loving ingredients, and out of 20,000 possible ingredients, they only use 500. So that's fewer than 3%. They only use less than 3% of the available ingredients because that's how selective they are about what goes into their products. That's amazing. So I'm going to end this episode with a quote from Erica Woods, who once again is the Senior VP of Mass Marketing at Revlon, about the future of the brand. Almay has always been trusted for its dermatologist and ophthalmologist tested formulations, designed with skin sensitivity in mind. This evolution brings our skin first legacy into a more contemporary beauty space, one rooted in performance, transparency, and ingredient simplicity. So those were the Chronicles of Almay. Let me know what you think of the brand. Did you know they've been around since 1931? I didn't. Did you have an intense eye color enhancing palette? I want to know. Let me know your thoughts. Leave me a comment, send me an email, tag me on Instagram, however you want to get in touch. Let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, pass it on to a friend. I am so grateful for you for listening, and I would love to have more beauty nerds in this space. So thank you for tuning in. And of course, as always, feel free to share some of the brands that you want to see covered on this podcast. I'll see you next time on the Cosmetic Chronicles.